The crystal chandelier above Kaia Finch's head scattered light like 1,000 captive stars, and the silver teapot in her hand felt heavier with each passing moment as she navigated the crowded ballroom of the Ravenswood estate. She hadn't wanted to come to this ridiculous event. Vampire Society balls were nothing like the vampire romance novels she'd devoured as a teenager, full of brooding immortals and swooning heroines. No, these modern gatherings were political theater disguised as high society entertainment, where ancient creatures played dress-up in designer gowns and tailored suits, pretending the world outside hadn't evolved past their archaic traditions. But her best friend Marcus worked for the catering company contracted for tonight's spectacle, and when 3 servers had called in sick at the last minute, he'd begged her to fill in. She'd agreed only because her rent was due in 5 days, and her bank account was laughing at her. Now she regretted every second of that phone call. The ballroom stretched before her like something out of a gothic fever dream transplanted into downtown Chicago. Marble floors polished to mirror brightness reflected the swirling dancers above, their movements precise and deliberate. The women wore gowns that probably cost more than Kaia's car, their jewelry catching the light with every turn. The men moved with the kind of confidence that came from centuries of existence, their postures perfect, their expressions ranging from bored to predatory. And every single vampire in the room was exactly as the old stories described. Skin like alabaster, hair ranging from silver to pure white, eyes that seemed to hold galaxies of experience and hunger. They were beautiful in the way that poisonous flowers were beautiful, dangerous in a way that made her human instincts scream at her to run. She kept her head down and her hands steady as she moved between clusters of guests, refilling teacups with the specially prepared blood tea that vampire high society favored at formal events. The liquid was dark and viscous, nothing like actual tea, and the scent made her stomach turn, but she smiled politely when necessary, murmured the appropriate phrases, and tried to blend into the background like every other human server working the event. "More tea, if you please," a vampire woman with a diamond collar said, barely glancing at Kaia as she held out her cup. Kaia poured with practiced efficiency, her wrist angled just right to avoid spilling a single drop. The woman didn't thank her, simply turned back to her companion and continued their conversation about some political matter in the European courts. Kaia moved on. The refreshment table had been set up along the western wall, an elaborate spread of crystal and silver that probably cost more than most people's yearly salaries. Kaia had been stationed there for the better part of an hour, managing the constant flow of vampires who drifted over between dances to refresh their drinks. Her feet ached in the borrowed heels Marcus had scrounged up for her, and her face hurt from maintaining a neutral, pleasant expression. She was refilling her teapot from one of the large samovars when the atmosphere in the room changed. It was subtle at first, like a shift in air pressure before a storm. Conversations didn't stop exactly, but they quieted, grew more hushed. Dancers continued their elegant movements, but heads turned, glances were exchanged. Kaia felt the hair on the back of her neck stand up, some primal part of her brain recognizing the presence of an apex predator before her conscious mind caught up. She looked up from the samovar, and her breath caught in her throat. He stood at the top of the grand staircase that led down into the ballroom, and every eye in the room had found him. He was tall, easily 6.5 feet, with the kind of presence that made the massive space feel suddenly smaller. His hair was pure white, falling just past his shoulders in a way that should have looked soft, but instead looked like silk spun from moonlight and winter. His skin was the pale alabaster of all his kind, but somehow more luminous, as though he carried his own light source beneath it. He wore a black suit that fit him like it had been painted on, tailored to perfection, with subtle embroidery along the collar and cuffs that caught the light when he moved. But it was his face that made Kaia's hands tremble on the teapot. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, lips that were full and expressive even in repose. And his eyes, even from across the room, she could see they were unusual, a shade of deep crimson that seemed to glow with their own inner fire. "The Vampire King," someone whispered near her, the words carrying a weight of awe and fear in equal measure. Kaia had heard of Fenris Fal'akor, of course. Everyone had, He was a legend even among vampires, a king who had ruled for over 2,000 years, who had survived challenges that would have destroyed lesser immortals, who commanded respect and terror from vampire courts on 6 continents. He rarely appeared at social functions, preferring to conduct his business from his stronghold somewhere beneath the city, emerging only when absolutely necessary. So what was he doing here? She watched as he descended the stairs with fluid grace, each movement economical and precise. The crowd parted for him like water before a ship's bow, vampires stepping aside and bowing their heads in deference as he passed. He acknowledged none of them, his gaze scanning the room as though searching for something specific. Kaia realized she'd been staring and quickly looked back down at her teapot, focusing on the task of filling it. The last thing she needed was to attract the attention of the Vampire King. Humans who caught the interest of powerful vampires rarely enjoyed happy endings, despite what the romance novels claimed. She finished filling the pot and lifted it carefully, turning back toward her station at the refreshment table. The weight of the silver pot was familiar now, comforting in its solidity. She wove between guests, murmuring apologies when she had to pass close to conversation clusters, keeping her eyes down and her movements unobtrusive. She was 3 steps from the table when she felt it. Not a physical sensation exactly, but something deeper, like a hook had caught somewhere in her chest and pulled. Her steps faltered, and she looked up despite herself, her eyes searching the crowd for the source of that strange feeling, and found herself staring directly into crimson eyes. Fenris Fal'akor had stopped in the center of the ballroom. He was no longer scanning the crowd. He was looking directly at her, his entire body utterly still in a way that was distinctly inhuman. The expression on his face was complex, shifting through surprise, recognition, wonder, and something fierce and possessive so quickly that Kaia almost thought she'd imagined it. Then he started moving toward her. Panic shot through her system like ice water. Every survival instinct she possessed screamed at her to run, but her feet seemed rooted to the floor. She watched, frozen, as the Vampire King crossed the ballroom with purpose, the crowd melting away from his path. Several vampires tried to approach him, to speak to him, but he brushed past them without a glance, his attention fixed entirely on her. Kaia's heart hammered against her ribs hard enough to hurt. Her hands tightened on the teapot. She should move, should do something, but her body refused to cooperate. He stopped 3 feet away from her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. Up close, he was even more striking than he'd been from across the room. His features were perfect in the way of very ancient vampires, as though time had worn away any imperfection, leaving behind only the essential, the ideal. But there was nothing cold about his expression now. His eyes were wide, almost vulnerable, and he was looking at her like she was something miraculous and impossible. "You," he said, his voice low and rough, carrying an accent she couldn't place, something ancient and layered with centuries of linguistic evolution. "You're real." Kaia opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her mind was racing, trying to understand what was happening, why the Vampire King was speaking to her, why he was looking at her like that. She managed to find her voice, though it came out smaller than she wanted. "I'm sorry. I don't understand. Your name." It wasn't quite an order, but the command was there beneath the surface, centuries of authority making it nearly impossible to refuse. "Tell me your name." "Kaia," she whispered. "Kaia Finch." Something blazed in his eyes at her words, triumph and relief and hunger all tangled together. He took a step closer, and she instinctively stepped back, her shoulders hitting the edge of the refreshment table. The teapot in her hand sloshed dangerously. "You don't remember," he said, and there was something like pain in his voice now. "Of course you don't. But I do. I've searched for you for 300 years, Kaia Finch. 300 years of looking for a face I could never forget, a soul I knew I would recognize the moment I found it again." The ballroom had gone completely silent now. Every vampire in the room was watching them, the tension thick enough to choke on. Kaia was aware of their attention, of the danger inherent in being the focus of so much predatory interest, but she couldn't look away from the man in front of her. "I think you have me confused with someone else," she said, trying to inject some firmness into her voice and failing. I'm just a server. I'm no one. No. The word was absolute, final. You are everything. You are the other half of my soul, the mate I lost centuries ago, returned to me at last. He lifted his hand slowly, as though afraid she might bolt, and reached toward her face. Kaia jerked back, the motion abrupt and graceless. The teapot tilted dangerously and she scrambled to steady it, her heart still pounding. I'm not your mate. I've never even met you before tonight. Pain flashed across his face, quickly masked. The soul returns, but the memory does not. I should have anticipated this, but Kaia, you must listen to me. We are bound, you and I. Destined. I felt the pull the moment I entered this room, the recognition that only comes once in an immortal's existence. You feel it too. I know you do. And the terrible thing was, she did feel something. That hook in her chest had tightened the closer he got, becoming an ache, a pull, something that wanted her to close the distance between them and let this stranger touch her. But that was crazy. She didn't believe in soulmates or destiny or any of that supernatural nonsense, despite the evidence of vampires standing all around her. She shook her head, trying to clear it, trying to think past the panic and confusion. I'm human, she said, grasping for any logical argument. Humans don't have mates. That's a vampire thing. It is, he agreed. But it can cross species in rare cases. So rare that most vampires live their entire existence without finding their match. I thought I had found mine once, 300 years ago. A young woman with your face, your eyes, your spirit. Her name was Catherine then, and she died before I could turn her, before I could bind us together for eternity. I have mourned her every day since. Catherine. The name sent a strange shiver through Kaia's body, like an echo of something half-remembered. But that was impossible. She was 24 years old, born and raised in Chicago, with parents and a birth certificate and a whole mundane human life that had nothing to do with ancient vampires and reincarnation. I'm not Catherine, she said firmly. And I'm not your mate. I'm sorry for your loss, truly, but you're mistaken. She tried to step sideways, to edge away from him and escape to the safety of the kitchen, but he moved with her, not touching her, but blocking her path. It wasn't aggressive exactly, but it was definite, a clear statement that he wasn't going to let her simply walk away. Let me prove it to you, he said, his voice dropping lower, becoming almost hypnotic. Let me show you what we could have together. Help you remember what we once were. Give me a chance, Kaia. Please. The please startled her. She wouldn't have expected a king, especially one as powerful as Fenris Fal'akor, to beg for anything. But there it was in his voice, raw and honest, the plea of someone who had lost everything and suddenly found it again. Before she could respond, another vampire appeared beside them. This one a woman with silver hair coiled in an elaborate updo and a dress that sparkled like starlight. Her expression was carefully neutral, but Kaia could see the calculation in her eyes as she looked between them. Your Majesty, the woman said, her voice smooth and cultured, forgive the interruption, but Lord Erasmus is asking for an audience. He says the matter is urgent regarding the treaty negotiations with the Soul Court. Fenris didn't look at her. His eyes remained fixed on Kaia. Tell Erasmus I will meet with him tomorrow evening. I am occupied at present. The woman's eyes widened slightly, genuine surprise breaking through her composure. Your Majesty, he was quite insistent. Perhaps if you could spare just a moment. No. The word was final, edged with warning. I have found something far more important than any treaty negotiation. Now leave us. The woman's gaze flicked to Kaia, something like envy or resentment flickering in her expression before she smoothed it away. She bowed her head and retreated, disappearing into the crowd of onlookers. Kaia realized her hands were shaking. She set the teapot down on the table behind her before she dropped it. You should go deal with your business, she said. I have work to do anyway. This conversation is over. It has barely begun, Fenris said. He reached out again, slower this time, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. His fingers brushed her wrist where it rested on the table, the lightest possible touch, and Kaia gasped. Heat flooded through her at the point of contact, racing up her arm and spreading through her entire body in seconds. It wasn't painful, but it was intense, overwhelming, like every nerve ending had suddenly caught fire. And beneath the physical sensation was something else, something emotional and vast, a sense of rightness and completion that terrified her with its intensity. Fenris's eyes had fallen closed, his expression one of almost painful relief. "You feel it," he said, his voice rough. "The bond recognizes us, even if your conscious mind does not yet remember." Kaia jerked her hand away, breaking the contact. The sensations faded, but didn't disappear entirely, leaving behind a humming awareness of him that made her skin prickle. "That doesn't mean anything. It's probably just some vampire trick. I have done nothing but touch you." He opened his eyes, and the intensity in them made her breath catch. "The bond cannot be manufactured or faked, Kaia. What you felt, what we both felt, is the truth of what we are to each other. Stop." She held up her hand, needing space to think, to breathe, to process any of this. "Just stop. This is insane. I came here to pour tea and make some extra money, not to get caught up in some vampire fantasy about reincarnated soulmates. I'm leaving. Right now." She grabbed her small purse from where she'd stashed it under the table and turned away from him, heading for the service entrance that led to the kitchen. Her legs felt shaky, but they carried her forward, one step and then another, putting distance between herself and the Vampire King and this impossible situation. She made it 5 steps before he was in front of her, moving with that supernatural speed that vampires possessed. She stumbled to a stop, her heart leaping into her throat. "Please don't run from me," he said quietly. "I know this is frightening. I know you have no reason to trust me. But I am asking you, begging you, to give me a chance to prove that what I say is true. Come with me, away from all these watching eyes. Let me speak with you properly. Explain everything." "Come with you where?" Kaia demanded, fear sharpening her voice. "To your lair, so you can lock me up and convince yourself I'm someone I'm not." Pain crossed his face again. "I would never imprison you, never. I am asking you to come of your own free will, and if at any point you wish to leave, I will arrange for you to be taken home safely. You have my word, on my crown and my honor." "The word of a vampire," Kaia said bitterly. "Forgive me if I'm not impressed." "Then the word of a man who has spent 3 centuries mourning the loss of the woman he loved," Fenris said, and the raw honesty in his voice made her chest ache. "A man who never thought he would feel anything but grief again, who had resigned himself to an eternity alone. You don't have to believe in the bond yet, Kaia. You don't have to believe in soulmates or reincarnation or destiny, but believe in the fact that I am telling you the truth as I know it, and that I would rather face the sun than cause you harm." Kaia stared at him, her mind racing through her options. She could try to run, but he'd already demonstrated he was faster than her. She could scream for help, but they were surrounded by vampires, and she doubted any of them would intervene against their king on behalf of a human server. She could keep refusing and hope he'd eventually give up, but the look in his eyes told her he wasn't going anywhere. Or she could take the insane risk of trusting him, just for a little while, just long enough to understand what was happening to her. 1 hour, she heard herself say. "I'll give you 1 hour to explain, somewhere public where there are other people around, and then I'm going home and you're going to leave me alone." Something that might have been hope flickered across his face. "There is a cafe 3 blocks from here, Nightshade. It caters to both vampires and humans. Neutral ground. Would that be acceptable?" Kaia knew the place. She'd walked past it a dozen times, though she'd never been inside. It was known for being one of the few establishments in the city where humans and vampires could mingle without the usual power dynamics that governed their interactions. If she was going to have this conversation anywhere, that was probably the safest option. "Fine," she said. "But I'm driving myself there. I'll meet you in 15 minutes. Fenris looked like he wanted to argue, probably to insist on accompanying her, but he nodded. 15 minutes. Thank you, Kaia. You won't regret this." She already regretted it, but she didn't say so. She just turned and walked away, forcing herself to move at a normal pace even though everything in her wanted to break into a run. She felt his eyes on her the entire way across the ballroom, that strange awareness between them humming like a live wire, and she didn't let herself look back. Marcus caught her arm as she pushed through into the kitchen. "Kaia, what the hell was that? The Vampire King? Are you insane?" "Probably," she said, yanking off her apron and grabbing her coat from the hook by the service entrance. "I have to go. I'm sorry." "Sorry?" "Kaia, you can't just leave in the middle of service, and you definitely can't get involved with someone like him. Do you have any idea how dangerous—" "I know, Marcus." She cut him off, not unkindly. "I know it's dangerous. I know it's stupid. But I don't think I have a choice. He thinks I'm his reincarnated mate or something, and he's not going to stop until I at least hear him out." Marcus's eyes went wide. "His mate? Oh God, Kaia. That's serious. That's life-altering serious. Vampires who find their mates become obsessive, possessive. They don't let go." "Which is why I need to convince him he's wrong," Kaia said, pulling on her coat. "One conversation. I'll explain that I'm just a regular human, that he's mistaken, and then hopefully he'll realize his error and leave me alone." Marcus didn't look convinced, but he let her go, squeezing her shoulder once in silent support. Kaia slipped out the service entrance into the cool Chicago night, breathing in the crisp air like a drowning person finally reaching the surface. Her car was parked 2 blocks away in a public lot. She walked quickly, her heels clicking on the pavement, hyper-aware of every shadow and movement around her. Chicago at night had never felt particularly safe, but now it felt positively menacing, full of potential threats and hidden watchers. She made it to her car without incident and locked the doors immediately once she was inside. Her hands were still shaking as she started the engine. This was crazy. This was absolutely insane. She should drive home right now, pack a bag, and get out of the city. Put as much distance as possible between herself and Fenris Fal'akor before this situation escalated beyond her control. But even as the thought formed, she knew she wouldn't do it. Because beneath the fear and confusion, beneath the very rational terror of being the focus of an ancient vampire's attention, there was something else. Curiosity. And beneath that, buried deeper, that strange pull she'd felt the moment their eyes met, the one that had only intensified when he touched her. She wanted to understand what it meant. Needed to, even if it scared her. The drive to Nightshade took less than 5 minutes. She found parking on the street and sat in her car for a moment, gathering her courage. Through the cafe's large windows, she could see the warm glow of Edison bulbs, the mix of human and vampire patrons sitting at small tables, the comfortable atmosphere of a place designed for coexistence rather than conflict. She got out of the car and walked inside before she could talk herself out of it. Nightshade was exactly as she'd imagined it, all exposed brick and vintage furniture, with a long bar along one wall and small tables scattered throughout. The clientele was indeed mixed, humans and vampires sitting separately for the most part, but occasionally intermingling, the humans here by choice rather than necessity. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers, and the scent of coffee and something sweeter, probably the synthetic blood substitute the cafe served, filled the air. Fenris was already there, sitting at a corner table with his back to the wall and a clear view of the entrance. He'd been watching for her, she realized, and stood as she entered, that same intensity in his gaze as before, but tempered now, more controlled. Kaia made her way over to him, aware of the curious glances from other patrons. A few of the vampires recognized him. She could tell by the way their postures shifted, became more deferential. But no one approached, respecting the invisible boundary of privacy he'd established around their table. "You came," he said, as she sat down across from him. "Thank you." "I said I would." Kaia folded her hands on the table, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. "You have 1 hour. Start talking." A waitress appeared before he could respond. A cheerful young woman with bright pink hair who seemed completely unfazed by the presence of vampire royalty. "What can I get you folks?" "Coffee," Kaia said. "Black with sugar." "And for you, sir?" "Nothing, thank you," Fenris said, though his tone was polite. The waitress nodded and disappeared. An awkward silence fell over the table. Kaia waited, determined not to be the first to speak, while Fenris seemed to be gathering his thoughts, choosing his words carefully. "I was born 2,143 years ago," he began finally. "In what is now northern Italy, though the borders and names were different then. I was turned at the age of 28 by a vampire who saw potential in me, who thought I might survive the transition and become something powerful. He was right, though I doubt he anticipated just how powerful I would become." Kaia listened, trying to wrap her mind around the sheer scope of that lifespan. 2,000 years. She couldn't even imagine it. "I spent centuries building my strength, my influence," Fenris continued. "I participated in the great wars between vampire houses, survived the purges, navigated the political intrigues that have shaped our society. 800 years ago, I claimed the title of king through rite of combat, defeating the previous ruler in single combat. I have held that crown ever since." "That's very impressive," Kaia said carefully. "But what does it have to do with me?" "I am providing context," he said, "so you understand what I am about to tell you. For most of my existence, I believed I was solitary by nature. I had companions, allies, lovers even, but nothing that touched me deeply. Nothing that made me feel truly connected to another soul. I thought perhaps I was simply too old, too removed from mortality to form such bonds. And then, 300 years ago, I met Catherine." His expression softened as he spoke the name, a mixture of love and loss that was almost painful to witness. She was human, the daughter of a merchant in London. I had come to the city on political business and attended a ball not unlike the one tonight. She was serving wine, moving through the crowd with such grace and determination, and the moment I saw her, I knew. The bond ignited like lightning, instantaneous and undeniable. I approached her, spoke to her, and she felt it too, I could tell. She was frightened at first, as you are now, but she agreed to let me court her properly. The waitress returned with Kaia's coffee. She wrapped her hands around the warm mug, grateful for something to hold on to. "We had 3 months together," Fenris said quietly. 3 months where I showed her my world, where we fell deeper into the bond with every meeting, every touch, every conversation. She was brilliant, Kaia, sharp and funny and brave. She challenged me in ways no one had in centuries. I asked her to marry me, to let me turn her so we could be together for eternity. She said yes. He paused, and Kaia could see the grief etched into his features even after all this time. Before I could complete the turning, she was killed. A rival vampire who opposed my rule, who thought to hurt me by destroying what I loved most. He set fire to her family's home while she slept. She died of smoke inhalation before I could reach her, before I could save her. "I'm sorry," Kaia said softly and meant it. Whatever else was happening here, his pain was real and raw even after 3 centuries. "I executed him," Fenris said flatly, "and everyone who had helped him. It didn't bring her back. Nothing could bring her back. So I mourned, and I ruled, and I resigned myself to spending eternity alone, carrying the memory of those 3 months as the only brightness in an otherwise gray existence." He looked up at her then, meeting her eyes directly. "And then tonight I walked into a ballroom and felt the bond again, exactly as I had felt it 300 years ago. Impossible, I thought. It must be a trick, some new scheme by my enemies. But I followed the pull anyway, and I found you. Catherine's face, Catherine's eyes, Catherine's soul looking back at me from a new life, a new body. Do you understand what that means to me, Kaia? It means she came back. It means I have been given a second chance at the only happiness I have ever known." Kaia took a long drink of her coffee, using the time to organize her thoughts. "That's a beautiful story," she said finally. "Tragic and romantic, but it's your story, not mine. I'm not Catherine. I don't have any memories of a past life. I've never been to London, never met you before tonight. You're looking at me and seeing someone else, someone you lost, and I understand why you'd want that to be true, but it's not fair to me." The soul remembers even when the mind does not, Fenris said. Tell me honestly, Kaia, do you feel nothing when you look at me? No recognition, no pull, no sense of connection? She wanted to say no. She wanted to be able to dismiss it all as imagination or fear or some vampire ability she didn't understand. But she'd never been good at lying, and the truth was too obvious to deny. I feel something, she admitted reluctantly. But that doesn't mean it's what you think it is. It could be anything. You're powerful, intimidating. Maybe it's just my body's fear response getting confused. Or maybe it's the bond, he said gently. Maybe your soul knows me, even if your mind doesn't yet. I'm not asking you to accept this immediately, Kaia. I know it's overwhelming, but I am asking you to keep an open mind, to give me time to prove what we are to each other. And if I say no, if I tell you right now that I want nothing to do with this, with you, pain flashed across his face, but he answered steadily, then I will honor your wishes. I will not force you, will not compel you or manipulate you, but I will not give up hope that you might change your mind. I will wait, however long it takes, for you to remember to feel what we had before. Which meant he would never truly leave her alone, Kaia realized. He would hover at the edges of her life, waiting, watching, hoping. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it made her feel oddly safe, knowing that someone that powerful was watching over her. She shook her head, trying to clear away the irrational thoughts. This is crazy. My whole life, I've been normal, boring even. I work as a freelance graphic designer. I live in a tiny apartment. I have student loans and a Netflix subscription. I'm not special. I'm not the reincarnated mate of a vampire king. You are special, Fenris said firmly. You were special 300 years ago, and you are special now. Not because of anything you do or don't do, but because of who you are. The kindness in your eyes, the strength in your bearing, the fire in your spirit. I see it, even if you don't. Kaia felt heat rise in her cheeks at his words. She wasn't used to such direct, intense attention. Most of her romantic interactions had been lukewarm at best, a series of forgettable dates and relationships that never quite clicked. She'd started to think maybe she was the problem, that she was too picky or too closed off, or just fundamentally uninterested in the kind of connection other people seem to find so easily. But looking at Fenris now, feeling that pull between them, even across the table, she wondered if maybe she'd just never found the right person, or the right vampire, apparently. Tell me about Catherine, she said, changing tactics. Not the tragic ending. Tell me about who she was, what she was like. If you really think I'm her reincarnation, I should know about her, right? Fenris's expression brightened, eager to talk about the woman he'd loved. She was stubborn, first and foremost. She had 8 siblings, and she helped raise most of them after her mother died. Her father was often absent, his merchant business taking him away for months at a time, so Catherine managed the household from the age of 16. She was only 22 when we met. 22. Almost exactly Kaia's age now. She tried not to find meaning in that coincidence. She loved books, Fenris continued. Rare in her time, especially for a woman of her class. But she had taught herself to read and would borrow books from anyone who would lend them. She had opinions on everything, politics and philosophy and art, and she wasn't afraid to voice them even when they contradicted my own. She made me laugh, which no one had done in centuries. She made me feel alive again. There was such tenderness in his voice that Kaia felt her resistance wavering. Whatever else was true, he had clearly loved Catherine deeply and completely. And now he was looking at Kaia with that same intensity, that same devotion. It was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. Did she have any family? Kaia asked. After she died, what happened to her siblings? I made sure they were taken care of, Fenris said. Financially, at least. I set up trusts for each of them, ensured they would never want for anything. It was the least I could do, the most I could do since I couldn't bring their sister back. That was kind of you. It was selfish, he corrected. I did it because they were part of her, because supporting them felt like I was still caring for her in some small way. But I am not a selfless creature, Kaia. I am possessive, territorial, and I have done terrible things in my long life to protect what is mine. You should know that about me before this goes any further." "Should that scare me?" Kaia asked. "Probably," he admitted. "But I will never harm you. That is the one absolute in all of this. I would destroy anyone who tried to hurt you, level cities, break treaties, start wars. But I would never, could never, raise a hand against you." The fierce protectiveness in his tone sent a shiver down her spine. She should find it alarming, the casual way he talked about violence and destruction. But instead, she felt valued, cherished in a way she'd never experienced before. She was definitely losing her mind. "I need time," she said finally. "Time to process all of this, to figure out what I'm feeling and why. I can't just jump into believing in soulmates and reincarnation overnight." "Take all the time you need," Fenris said immediately. "But let me be part of that time. Let me see you again, talk with you, show you that what I feel is real and true. No pressure, no expectations, just time together." It was a dangerous proposition. Every moment she spent with him would make it harder to walk away. She knew that instinctively. But the alternative was to never see him again, to always wonder what might have been, and that felt impossible now. "Okay," she heard herself say, "we can see each other again, but slowly. No declarations of eternal love, no talk of turning me into a vampire, no expectations that I'm going to suddenly remember a past life. Just getting to know each other as we are now." Relief and joy washed over his features, transforming him from intimidating to almost boyish in his happiness. "Yes, absolutely. Whatever you need, Kaia. Thank you." They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing more easily now that the initial tension had broken. Fenris told her more about his life, the places he'd traveled, the changes he'd witnessed over 2,000 years. He was surprisingly easy to talk to, his ancient perspective making him thoughtful and considered in his responses. And when Kaia talked about her own life, her work, her friends, her dreams, he listened with complete attention, as though nothing else in the world mattered but her words. It was addictive, that kind of focus. Kaia had never felt so heard, so seen. When she finally looked at her phone, she was startled to discover it was past midnight. "I should go," she said reluctantly. "I have a client meeting in the morning." "Let me walk you to your car," Fenris said, standing as she did. They walked the short distance in comfortable silence, the Chicago streets quiet at this hour. When they reached her car, Fenris stopped a respectful distance away, not crowding her. "Can I see you again tomorrow?" he asked. "Perhaps dinner, somewhere nice?" "I have that client meeting and then work to catch up on," Kaia said. "But tomorrow evening should work. Text me the details." She pulled out her phone and they exchanged numbers, the mundane modern gesture feeling surreal given everything else that had happened tonight. When she looked up from saving his contact information, she found him watching her with such open affection that her breath caught. "Thank you for tonight," he said softly. "For giving me a chance. I know you have no reason to trust me, but I promise I will spend every day proving myself worthy of that trust." "We'll see," Kaia said, trying to sound casual even though her heart was racing. "Good night, Fenris." "Good night, Kaia." She got into her car and drove away, watching him in her rearview mirror until she turned the corner and he disappeared from view. Only then did she let out the breath she'd been holding, her hands tightening on the steering wheel. What had she just agreed to? The next week passed in a blur of surreal normalcy. Kaia worked during the day, meeting with clients and working on design projects from her small apartment, and in the evenings she saw Fenris. He took her to dinner at restaurants she could never have afforded on her own, elegant places with more forks than seemed strictly necessary, and wine lists thicker than novels. He walked with her through late-night museums and galleries, using his influence to arrange private viewings so they could talk without crowds. They went to a jazz club where the music was so beautiful it made her chest ache, and to a vampire theater where the performances were centuries old and hauntingly lovely. And they talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories and opinions and dreams. Fenris was endlessly curious about modern life, about technology and culture and how humans lived now compared to centuries past. Kaia found herself equally fascinated by his perspective, by the way someone who had lived through so much history viewed the world. He was careful never to push her, never to pressure her for more than she was ready to give. He didn't try to kiss her, though she caught him looking at her mouth sometimes with an intensity that made heat pool low in her belly. He didn't talk about the mate bond unless she brought it up, though she could feel it between them constantly now, that pull growing stronger with every hour they spent together. By the end of the week, Kaia had to admit she was falling for him, not because of some mystical bond or reincarnated soul connection, but because of who he was right now. Thoughtful, protective, funny in a dry sort of way that caught her off guard and made her laugh. Powerful, but never cruel. Commanding, but never dismissive. He treated her like she was the most important person in existence, and it was impossible not to respond to that kind of devotion. On Friday evening, he picked her up from her apartment for dinner. She'd been getting ready when she heard the knock and opened the door to find him standing there in dark slacks and a charcoal gray shirt, looking like he'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. "Hi," she said, suddenly shy. She'd put on a deep green dress that she usually saved for special occasions, and from the way his eyes darkened as they swept over her, he appreciated it. "You're beautiful," he said simply. "Are you ready?" They drove to the restaurant in his car, a sleek black vehicle that probably cost more than Kaia's apartment. The restaurant was on the top floor of one of Chicago's tallest buildings, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the glittering city. They were shown to a private table in a corner, the lighting intimate, the atmosphere perfect for romance. Dinner was delicious, some kind of fusion cuisine that Kaia couldn't have begun to describe, but enjoyed immensely. Fenris ordered wine that probably cost more than her monthly rent and watched with obvious pleasure as she tried each dish. "I have something I want to show you," he said as they were finishing dessert. "After this, if you're willing." "What is it?" Kaia asked. "My home," Fenris said. "My real home, not the administrative offices where I conduct business. I've never shown it to anyone, Kaia, but I want to share it with you." It felt significant, monumental even, an invitation into his private space, the place where he lived when he wasn't playing king. Kaia knew she should be cautious, should maybe suggest they wait a bit longer before taking that step. But she found herself nodding. "I'd like that." They finished dinner, and he drove them to an unassuming building in an old warehouse district. From the outside, it looked abandoned, windows dark, walls covered in graffiti. But when Fenris placed his hand on a hidden panel beside the door, it swung open silently, revealing a modern elevator. They rode down, not up. Down several floors into the earth, the elevator moving smoothly and quickly. When the doors finally opened, Kaia stepped out into the most beautiful space she'd ever seen. It was vast, open plan, with soaring ceilings and exposed stone walls that looked ancient, but the furnishings were modern and comfortable. Plush sofas and chairs arranged around a massive fireplace, shelves full of books and art, soft lighting that made everything feel warm and inviting. One entire wall was glass, looking out onto what appeared to be an underground lake, the water dark and still and somehow peaceful. "This is incredible," Kaia breathed, turning slowly to take it all in. "It's built into the old limestone caves beneath the city," Fenris explained. "I had it expanded and renovated about 50 years ago. It's safe from sunlight, obviously, but more than that, it's quiet, private, the only place where I can truly be myself." He led her through the space, showing her the extensive library, the kitchen that he admitted he rarely used, the study where he kept his most valuable possessions. Everything was elegant but comfortable, a reflection of both his ancient tastes and his modern existence. Finally, he brought her to a sitting area near the glass wall, where they could look out at the underground lake. They sat together on a sofa, close but not touching, and silence fell between them, comfortable and easy. "Thank you for showing me this," Kaia said softly. "I know it means something, you letting me in here." "It means everything," Fenris corrected. "You are the first and only person I've ever brought to this place, Kaia. Because you are the first and only person I've ever wanted to share it with." She turned to look at him and found him already watching her, those crimson eyes intense and focused. The pull between them was nearly overwhelming now, no longer a subtle awareness, but a living thing that demanded acknowledgement. "Fenris," she whispered, "I need to tell you something. Anything. I've been trying to convince myself that what I feel is just attraction, that it's just the natural response to someone paying attention to me, someone powerful and protective showing interest. But it's more than that, isn't it? This thing between us." "Yes," he said quietly. "It is. I still don't remember Catherine. I don't know if I ever will. But I'm starting to believe that maybe that doesn't matter. Because what I feel for you right now as Kaia and Fenris, it's real. It's mine. And it's terrifying and wonderful, and I don't know what to do with it." Fenris reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his hand. His palm was cool against her skin, his touch gentle despite the strength she knew he possessed. "You don't have to do anything," he said. "Just feel it. Let it be what it is. And know that I feel it too, just as strongly. You could have been anyone, Kaia. The bond could have brought you back completely different from who Catherine was. But you're you, brilliant and brave and beautiful, and I am falling in love with you all over again, not because of who you were, but because of who you are." Tears pricked at Kaia's eyes. She blinked them back, overwhelmed by the depth of emotion in his words, by the truth of what she felt reflected back at her. "Can I kiss you?" Fenris asked, his voice rough. "Please, Kaia. I've been wanting to since the moment I saw you, but I needed you to be ready, to want it too." "Yes," she breathed. He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind, to pull away. But Kaia met him halfway, her eyes falling closed as their lips met. The kiss was soft at first, gentle, almost reverent. But within seconds the bond flared between them, that pull becoming a roar of need and recognition. Kaia gasped against his mouth and Fenris took advantage, deepening the kiss, his other hand coming up to thread through her hair. It was like nothing Kaia had ever experienced. Every nerve ending in her body was alive, singing, responding to his touch with an intensity that bordered on overwhelming. She could feel his emotions through the bond now, the love and desire and fierce protectiveness he felt for her, and it was echoed by her own feelings, magnified and reflected back until she couldn't tell where she ended, and he began. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Fenris rested his forehead against hers. "Mine," he whispered. "You're mine, Kaia. My mate, my other half, my everything." "Yours," she agreed, the word feeling right and true. "And you're mine, Fenris. No matter what comes, you're mine." They stayed like that for a long moment, wrapped up in each other, the bond settled and content now that they'd both acknowledged what was between them. Eventually, they pulled back just enough to look at each other, and Kaia saw her own wonder and joy reflected in his eyes. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Fenris said, "we figure out how to build a life together. I know it won't be easy. There are complications, political issues that come with being mated to a vampire king. And there's the question of your mortality, though I would never turn you unless you wanted it, not after what happened before." Kaia hadn't thought that far ahead yet, hadn't considered the practical realities of loving someone immortal, but looking at him now, feeling the bond between them humming with contentment, she knew she'd figure it out. They'd figure it out together. "One step at a time," she said. "Right now, I just want to be here with you." "Then stay," Fenris said. "Stay with me tonight. No pressure, no expectations. Just stay." So she did. They talked for hours, curled up together on the sofa, sharing stories and kisses and comfortable silences. At some point, Kaia dozed off, exhausted by the emotional intensity of the evening, and woke to find herself carried to a bedroom, tucked into the softest bed she'd ever felt, with Fenris sitting in a chair nearby, watching over her. "Sleep," he said softly when she stirred. "I'll be here." And she did, falling into the deepest, most peaceful sleep she'd had in years, safe in the knowledge that he would keep his word. The next few weeks were both blissful and challenging. Fenris had been right about the complications. As word spread through vampire society that their king had found his mate, the political ramifications became impossible to ignore. There were vampires who were happy for him, who saw it as a cause for celebration, but there were others who viewed a human mate as a weakness, a liability that could be exploited. And there were those who had hoped to position themselves closer to the throne, who saw Kaia as an obstacle to their ambitions. Fenris handled it all with the kind of calm authority that came from 2,000 years of rule, making it clear that anyone who threatened Kaia would face his wrath. But Kaia could see the strain it put on him, the constant vigilance required to keep her safe in a world that didn't always welcome humans. For her part, Kaia tried to adapt as quickly as possible. She researched vampire society, learning the complex hierarchies and ancient traditions that governed their world. She met with advisors who helped her understand what being mated to a king would mean, what responsibilities she might be expected to take on. And she trained, learning self-defense from guards who took her safety as seriously as Fenris did. It was exhausting and overwhelming, but she had Fenris beside her through all of it, steady and supportive and endlessly patient. 2 months after that first night at the ball, Kaia moved into his underground home. She'd argued against it at first, wanting to maintain some independence, but after the third attempt on her life by vampires who saw her as a threat, she'd admitted defeat. Her little apartment wasn't safe, and she couldn't live under constant guard without going insane. Living with Fenris was surprisingly easy. He gave her space when she needed it, respected her work schedule, and never made her feel like she was an imposition. And the nights they spent together, talking and laughing and falling deeper in love with each passing day, were the best of her life. But the question of her mortality loomed between them, unspoken, but impossible to ignore. It came to a head 3 months into their relationship. They were having dinner, a rare quiet evening with no political obligations or security concerns, when Fenris set down his wine glass and looked at her seriously. "We need to talk about the future," he said. Kaia had been expecting this conversation, but that didn't make it any easier. She set down her own glass and nodded. "Okay. I meant what I said about not pressuring you to turn," Fenris began. "After what happened with Catherine, I swore I would never force anyone into immortality. But Kaia, you need to understand what it means if you choose to remain human. You'll age while I stay the same. You'll grow old and eventually die, and I'll be left behind again, alone for another eternity. I don't know if I can survive that a second time." The pain in his voice was tangible, and Kaia reached across the table to take his hand. "I know," she said softly. "I've been thinking about it too. And I've made a decision." Fenris went very still, his eyes fixed on her face. "I want to turn," Kaia said. "Not because I'm afraid of dying, or because I think it's the only way to keep you, but because when I think about the future, every version of it that makes me happy includes you. Forever. I want to see the world change with you, experience centuries of existence by your side. I want everything you can offer, Fenris, including immortality." Relief and joy washed over his face so intensely that it was almost painful to witness. "Are you certain? Once it's done, there's no going back. You'll leave behind your human life, your mortality, everything you've known." "I'm certain," Kaia said firmly. "I've never been more certain of anything. I love you, Fenris. I want eternity with you." He was around the table in an instant, pulling her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "So much, Kaia. I will spend every day of our forever making sure you never regret this choice." They decided to wait another month, to give Kaia time to tie up loose ends in her human life and make sure she was truly ready. She told Marcus, who was simultaneously horrified and happy for her, and made him promise to keep in touch after the turning. She finished her outstanding work projects and said goodbye to the few other friends she had, making excuses about moving abroad that they seemed to accept. And she spent every possible moment with Fenris, storing up memories and happiness against whatever challenges lay ahead. The turning itself was scheduled for the dark of the moon, a traditional vampire practice that was supposed to make the transition easier. Fenris explained the process to her in detail, making sure she understood that it would be painful, that she would essentially die and be reborn, that there was a small chance something could go wrong. But Kaia wasn't afraid, not with Fenris beside her. not with the bond between them singing with certainty that this was right, that they were meant for this. The night of the turning, Fenris brought her to a private chamber deep within his home, a room she'd never seen before. It was circular, the walls carved with ancient symbols, the floor inscribed with a pattern that looked like a cross between a mandala and a magic circle. Candles provided the only light, their flames casting dancing shadows across the stone. "This is where I was turned," Fenris said quietly. "Over 2,000 years ago, in a cave in Italy that looked much like this. I wanted you to have the same ceremony, the same respect given to your transformation." Kaia looked around the room, feeling the weight of history and significance in every carved line. "It's perfect." They stood in the center of the circle, facing each other. Fenris took both her hands in his. "Last chance to change your mind," he said, though his voice was steady, confident that she wouldn't. "Not a chance," Kaia said, smiling up at him. "I'm ready." He pulled her close and kissed her, slow and deep and full of love. When he pulled back, his eyes had shifted, the red taking on an inner glow, and she could see the points of his fangs as his lips parted. "Trust me," he whispered. "Always." He bent his head to her throat, and she felt the sharp pain of his fangs sinking into her skin. It hurt, but not unbearably, and within seconds the pain was replaced by a strange floating sensation, as though she was becoming unmoored from her body. She could feel her blood flowing out, her heartbeat slowing, her breathing becoming shallow. She should have been terrified. But the bond between them was blazing bright, and through it she could feel Fenris's love and determination, his fierce promise that he wouldn't let her go, that he would guide her through this and keep her safe. Just as consciousness began to fade, she felt him pull back. He bit his own wrist and brought it to her lips. "Drink," he commanded, and she did. His blood was different from anything she'd ever tasted, sweet and metallic and charged with power. It burned going down, a line of fire that spread through her entire body. Her heart, which had slowed to almost nothing, began to race. Her body convulsed, and she would have fallen if Fenris hadn't been holding her. The pain was excruciating. Every cell in her body dying and being rebuilt, human mortality giving way to vampire strength. She screamed, or thought she did, and felt Fenris holding her tighter, his voice in her ear telling her she was strong. She could do this. He was here. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the pain stopped. Kaia gasped, her senses suddenly flooded with information. She could hear everything. The flutter of flame on the candles, the flow of the underground lake hundreds of yards away, Fenris's breath and heartbeat overlaying her own. She could smell the stone of the walls, the wax of the candles, and beneath it all, Fenris's scent, dark and spicy and completely intoxicating. She opened her eyes and the world was different, brighter, sharper, every detail in perfect clarity even in the dim candlelight. She looked up at Fenris and saw him in a way she never had before, could see the power that thrummed beneath his skin, the age in his eyes, the absolute beauty of him. "Kaia?" he said, his voice tentative. "Are you all right?" She took stock of herself. Her body felt different, stronger, more alive than it ever had. The bond between them was no longer just an awareness, but a living connection, bright and unbreakable. And beneath it all was a new hunger, a need for blood that she'd have to learn to manage. But she was alive. She was changed. And Fenris was still there, still holding her, still loving her. "I'm perfect," she said, and her voice was different too, richer, more resonant. "Fenris, I'm perfect." Relief flooded his face and he kissed her again, deeper this time, and she could taste him differently now, could feel the bond between them completed and sealed in a way it hadn't been before. They stayed in that room for hours, Fenris teaching her how to use her new senses, how to control the strength that now coursed through her body, how to manage the hunger without letting it control her. He was patient and thorough, and by the time they finally emerged, Kaia felt confident in her new abilities. The next several weeks were spent adjusting to her new existence. Fenris had cleared his schedule as much as possible to be with her, guiding her through the transition, teaching her what it meant to be vampire, She learned to hunt, to feed without killing, to navigate vampire society from the position of power she now occupied as the king's mate. It was challenging and sometimes frightening, but it was also exhilarating. She was stronger, faster, more capable than she'd ever been as a human, and the bond between her and Fenris had deepened to the point where they could feel each other's emotions constantly, a connection that was intimate and precious. 6 months after her turning, Fenris threw a ball to formally introduce her to vampire society as his mate and consort. It was held in the same ballroom where they'd first met, and as Kaia descended the grand staircase on Fenris's arm, she felt a strange sense of symmetry, of a story coming full circle. She wore a gown of deep crimson that complemented her new vampire pallor, her hair now shot through with silver-white strands that Fenris said made her look even more beautiful. She'd learned the proper manners, the correct forms of address, all the political nuances necessary to navigate this world. But more importantly, she had Fenris beside her, his presence steady and reassuring, his love for her obvious in every glance and touch. They danced together as the orchestra played, and Kaia remembered that first night, pouring tea at a ball, never imagining that her life was about to change forever. She remembered the moment their eyes had met across the crowded room, the way her world had tilted on its axis. "What are you thinking about?" Fenris murmured as they swayed together. "That night," Kaia said. "When you found me, I was so scared, so certain that getting involved with you would be a disaster. And now? Now I know it's the best thing that ever happened to me." She smiled up at him. "You gave me everything, Fenris. A new life, a new purpose, a love I never thought I'd find. I don't care if I was Catherine in a past life or not. What matters is who we are now, together." "Together," Fenris agreed, spinning her in a graceful turn. "For all eternity, my love. I will never let you go again." "Promise?" Kaia asked, though she could feel the truth of it through their bond. "Promise," Fenris said, and sealed it with a kiss there in the middle of the ballroom, in front of all of vampire society, a declaration and a vow that nothing would ever separate them again. The years that followed were full of challenge and joy in equal measure. Kaia stepped into her role as consort with grace and determination, learning to navigate the complex politics of vampire society, using her influence to push for reforms that would protect weaker vampires and improve relations with the human world. She and Fenris ruled together, partners in every sense of the word, their bond making them stronger than either could have been alone. They traveled the world, visiting vampire courts on every continent, and Kaia fell in love with the beauty and diversity of the immortal world she now inhabited. They spent months in Tokyo, learning from the ancient vampires of the East. They visited the European courts, where Fenris introduced her to vampires he'd known for centuries. They even spent time in South America, helping to mediate a territorial dispute that threatened to escalate into war. But they always returned to Chicago, to the underground home where they'd first admitted their love, where they could be simply Kaia and Fenris, without the weight of crowns and responsibilities. 50 years after her turning, on a quiet evening, much like the one where Fenris had first told her he loved her, they sat together by the glass wall overlooking the underground lake. "I have something to tell you," Kaia said, a smile playing at her lips. Fenris looked at her with immediate attention. "What is it?" "I've been doing some research, talking to the older vampires, the ones who remember the ancient ways, and I found something interesting." "Oh?" Fenris said, intrigued. "Did you know that mated vampires, when their bond is strong enough, can sometimes have children? It's incredibly rare, maybe once every 1,000 years, but it's possible. The bond creates something new, a kind of magic that allows for life even in immortal bodies." Fenris had gone very still. "I knew the old stories, but I always assumed they were myths. Are you saying—" "I'm saying I think we should try," Kaia said, taking his hands in hers. "I think our bond is strong enough, and I think it would be beautiful to create something that's part of both of us, to have a family." Wonder and hope bloomed across Fenris's face. "You want a child? With me?" "I want everything with you," Kaia said simply, "and this feels like the next adventure." It took time. Vampire conception was nothing like human biology, requiring a combination of intention, magic, and the kind of bond that most vampires never achieved. But Kaia and Fenris had that bond, strengthened by 50 years of love and partnership. And one evening, Kaia woke from her rest with the certain knowledge that it had worked. She could feel it, a new presence in her awareness, small and precious and growing. She told Fenris immediately and watched as he broke down in tears of joy, something she'd never seen in all their years together. He held her carefully, as though she'd suddenly become fragile, and whispered his love and gratitude over and over. The pregnancy was long by human standards, taking nearly 2 years from conception to birth. But Kaia didn't mind. She reveled in every moment, in the way her body changed to accommodate this new life, in the way she and Fenris would spend hours talking to their unborn child, telling stories and making promises. When their daughter was finally born, on a winter evening in their underground home, she came into the world with silver hair and eyes that shifted between blue and crimson. They named her Lyanna, and she was perfect. Fenris held his daughter with a tenderness that made Kaia's heart ache. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I'm your father, and I promise I will protect you and love you for all of eternity." Lyanna made a small sound and wrapped her tiny hand around his finger, and Fenris looked up at Kaia with tears streaming down his face. "Thank you," he said, "for this, for everything, for coming back to me, for choosing me, for giving me a family I never thought I'd have." "We gave it to each other," Kaia said, joining them, her own eyes wet. "We built this together, Fenris, and we'll raise her together, show her how to be strong and kind and brave." And they did. Lyanna grew up surrounded by love and security, knowing she was treasured by both her parents and the entire vampire court. She was clever and curious, with her father's strategic mind and her mother's compassion. Watching her develop her own personality, her own strengths, was one of the greatest joys of Kaia's long life. When Lyanna was 25 years old in appearance, though technically only 12 years had passed since her birth, vampire children grew differently. She came to her parents with a question. "Tell me about how you met," she said. "The real story, not the political version everyone else hears." So Kaia and Fenris sat down with their daughter and told her everything. About the ball, about Catherine, about reincarnation and soul bonds, and the moment their eyes had met across a crowded room. They told her about Kaia's fear and Fenris's determination, about the challenges they'd faced and the love that had carried them through. Lyanna listened with rapt attention, and when they finished, she smiled. "That's the most romantic thing I've ever heard," she said, "and also completely insane, but I'm glad it happened, because otherwise I wouldn't be here." "Neither would we," Fenris said, pulling both his wife and daughter into an embrace. "Not really. We'd be going through the motions of existence, but we wouldn't be living. Your mother taught me how to live again, Lyanna. She gave me purpose and joy and a reason to face each new century with hope instead of resignation. And your father gave me adventure and magic and a love story I didn't even know I was looking for," Kaia added. "We found each other when we needed it most, and we built something beautiful together." "You're both disgustingly adorable," Lyanna said, but she was smiling, her love for them obvious in every line of her face. That night, after Lyanna had gone to her own rooms, Kaia and Fenris stood together by the glass wall as they had so many times before. The underground lake was calm, reflecting the soft lights of their home. "Do you ever miss it?" Fenris asked quietly. "Your human life, the simplicity of what you had before?" Kaia thought about it seriously before answering. "Sometimes I miss certain things, the taste of coffee, the ability to walk in sunlight without precautions. But miss my old life? No, never. Because this life, the one I have with you, is everything I could have wanted and more. You gave me purpose, Fenris. You gave me power and agency and a voice that matters, and most importantly, you gave me a love that transcends lifetimes." "You gave me the same," Fenris said, turning to face her. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing across her skin with infinite tenderness. "I existed for 2,000 years before you, Kaia. I ruled, I fought, I survived, but I wasn't alive, not truly. You brought me back to life, made me feel again, made me hope again. You are my miracle, and I will spend eternity showing you how grateful I am that fate brought you back to me." Kaia leaned into his touch, feeling the bond between them humming with contentment and love. "Fate brought me to that ballroom," she said. "But we chose each other every day since. That's what matters." "We did," Fenris agreed, "and we'll keep choosing each other for all the centuries to come." He kissed her then, slow and deep and full of promise. And as Kaia kissed him back, she felt the truth of his words in every fiber of her being. They had been given a second chance, a miracle of reincarnation or fate or simple luck, but what they'd built together was entirely their own, forged through trust and love and the determination to never let each other go. The story that had started with a hand stopping hers as she poured tea at a ball had become something epic and eternal, a vampire king and his reborn mate ruling together, loving together, building a legacy that would endure for centuries. And as Kaia stood in Fenris's arms, looking out at the underground lake that had witnessed so much of their love story, she knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. Every decision, every risk, every moment of fear and uncertainty had been worth it to arrive at this perfect moment, forever stretched out before them, full of unknown challenges and unwritten adventures. But they would face it together, bound by a love that had already survived death once and would never be broken again. In the end, that was all that mattered. Not crowns or politics or ancient bloodlines. Just two souls who had found each other across the centuries and refused to let go. Just love, pure and eternal and unbreakable. Just Kaia and Fenris, together forever, exactly as they were always meant to be.